It's Giles Brown.
Formula One, the circuits then and now. This is the sort of book I really like to get my teeth into. It's a fascinating look. It's a unique and compelling history and a guide to some of the classic Grand Prix tracks, and it pairs vintage images with the same viewpoint today, as well as looking at some of the circuits that are no longer used. This is the sort of thing that I will spend hours poring over. Delighted to say that the author of Formula One, the circuits then now, Frank Hopkinson, joins me live on the line now. Frank, good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon, Giles.
Great to have you with. I'm saying, as a self-proclaimed petrol head, this is the sort of thing that I look at and go, ooh, because it is some of the images you've got in there, and also some of the circuits you've got in there, are so evocative of a time when, as the saying goes, what was it? Sex was safe and motor racing was dangerous. And you just kind of marvel at the, as we say in this part of the world, the cojones that these guys had. What's your background to bring you into the book?
Well, I was, for a time, I was the deputy editor of F1 Racing magazine, which has morphed into GP Racing. Like yourself, my father raced sports cars, so I was dragged along to Alton Park and places like that. And in fact, Adrian Newey in his biography said that the first race he saw was the Gold Cup at Alton Park, which was the sort of non-F1 race that they all turned up to. But the thing about Alton Park in the old days, you couldn't overtake. So in 1970, I watched it, and it was just a procession of cars. But so basically, being taken along to all the race circuits, like yourself, and just sort of the interest grew from there.
Yeah, but you see Alton Park, and here I'm putting my anorak on and I'm putting the toggles in, because Alton Park has got one of the best photo opportunities when they come out of Lodge Corner. You see the lodge in the back, and then they go down Deer Leap.
Yeah, that's right. And I wanted to have it in the book, but there's not recent pictures of Formula One machinery going around it. It's because it's just the speeds are just too great.
Yeah, this is the thing, isn't it? Because if you look at some of these circuits, and they used to, these guys would rock up and they do, non-championship F1 races, like the Gold Cup, like the Race of Champions, the International Trophy, and whatever. And you look at some of the circuits and you think, goodness gracious me. I mean, because there came a time in the late 60s, early 70s when the cars were too powerful for some of these circuits that they were attempting.
They were also not very safe. I mean, you get Joe Schlesser, who was killed at Rouen, one of the circuits. Can I talk about that?
Yeah, you can indeed. No, I'm wincing because I know what happens, because the Honda's made out of basically magnesium.
Yeah, it was just like an incendiary device waiting to go off. And Rouen, I do cover Rouen, and that is one example of a racetrack that's completely been sort of wiped off the face of the earth. And you go downhill on what is a D road to Oreval, and there's a very sharp turning called the Virage des Six Frères. And he went off there, and the car ended up in a fireball. And there's subsequently been a memorial to the 6 drivers that have died over the years at that corner.
Yeah, and also the other thing with Rouen, of course, was the fact, and that particular crash, is there is a video, or you can see it, and the car just is absolutely ablaze, and they keep going. They don't. I mean, it's quite amazing that they don't sort of stop the race, is it? Really.
This is it. Today, if you just, park the car at the side of the track, they'll have the safety car out and they'll winch it. And obviously that's a good thing. But yes, it's extraordinary looking back at what happened. There was a very famous Spanish Grand Prix where I think Jackie Oliver went into Jackie Ickx, and the cars were ablaze at the side of the track, and the marshals didn't have enough fire extinguisher to put it out. And it raged throughout the entire race. So you've got the cars racing through, and Jack Brabham spun on the fire extinguisher foam that was put down about 3 times going through the corner. But it just kept on going. The guys were safe. Both drivers got out, but the cars were complete write-offs.
And the other thing about that is the fact, if you look at this, it was especially in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. You tended to get, rather than now you've got a medical, because obviously Professor Sid Watkins wasn't involved. You didn't have specialised marshals. It tended to be sort of local law authority. So you see the Guardia Civil running across in their old sort of fascist hats, tripping over each other and basically getting in the way.
Well, when Jackie Stewart had his big accident at Monaco in 1966, that was one of the reasons that sort of drove Jackie Stewart on to be such a campaigner for safety, because basically he went off near the Master Kink, which we were talking about before, and eventually he got put in an ambulance to go to Liège, and the ambulance driver didn't know where to go and got lost. And so after that, they tightened up the idea of having some medical facilities. And you're right, Sid Watkins and Bernie Ecclestone really tightened up the rules, and they wouldn't allow practice unless the safety helicopter could fly, the medical helicopter. So it's come on tremendously. Yeah. But yeah, this does look back at some of the times of old.
Yeah, the thing at Spa wasn't is the fact that Stewart was trapped in the car, and only Graham Hill had a spanner, in his car to get him out of the thing. I mean, it just
no. I think they got it from a spectator. They found a spectator with a toolkit to take the steering wheel off, all the while that Jackie Stewart was bathed in petrol next to a hot engine. But just the interesting thing about that 1966 race is if you watch John Frankenheimer's F1 the Grand Prix movie, there's some tremendous footage of that. They arranged to have helicopters cover the opening laps, and there was a deluge, so cars were going off all over the place, including Stewart's accident. And they had Phil Hill in the camera car. They arranged and one of the leading drivers was overtaken by Phil Hill in a camera car. It's like, you just imagine that in Formula One today. They're making a movie, and that happens. But yeah, no, they were the wild old days, and in a way, it's good that they're gone. But you realise what risks they were taking.
But you see, one of the things is, I mean, if you put it in context, and this isn't a get out clause, but motor racing, especially in the UK, sort of started to take shape after the Second World War, and you had young men who had been adrenaline junkies during the war. Maybe they'd been RAF pilots or whatever, and there were all these airfields that were brilliant for motor racing because they had these long straights and there was nowhere around them. You just threw a couple of hay bales, and so the sort of race what you brung mentality started. Car clubs were really popular, and there was a sort of kind of acceptance because people had been through so much during the war, and also road races. I mean, you think about the T. I talked about international TT, but is it Dunrood, of course, which has 3 fatalities, and then there are these crazy, the Targa Floria, the Mille Miglia, all these crazy sort of huge road races with absolutely no marshals, and they just getting, especially in the 50s, which was the thing about the Ferrari film about, what was it, 57, and they just get in the car and they go for it.
Yeah, well, that's it. And there's a story about the Mille Miglia. Some of the villagers would actually screw their doors shut so that they didn't. Because there was an interval between cars coming through, they actually screwed them shut so they would remember not to go out into the street and be run over by a car.
One of the things also I spotted in the book is because you look at because people tend to think, okay, motor racing begins in 1950 with the British Grand Prix and all that sort of stuff, but it predates that. And you have circuits such as Avus and I spoke to Richard Williams about his brilliant book about Dick Seaman. And there was this huge interest in what was then the European season, with obviously people like Lang, Seaman, Nuvolari, all these races, and you've got Avus in there, and this, Rosamund, and this was, there is a past here. There, obviously there was the Nazis saw this as a way of furthering their aims, but some of the shots of sort of Avus and the banking there are just quite something.
Yeah, the Avus was incredibly dangerous because they didn't have a rail at the top. They had this like wall of basically Avis was two huge long straights that were part of an autobahn, and then two corners at the two corners there, two gigantic banked corners. Well, there was only banked at the north curve there; it wasn't banked at the south curve. But this bank curve at the north curve was just like a huge wall of death, and they had flagpoles on the outside. And ultimately, it was Jean Béra, the great French driver, who in a sports car race lost his the same car that I think that James Dean was killed in. It was a Porsche Spider, and he drove off the edge of the banking. That didn't kill him, but he struck at one of the flagpoles.
Yeah,
that was lining the circuit.
Because they, again, no seatbelts. I mean, there's this picture of him just leaving the car, with his arms.
You've seen one? I've never seen that.
Oh yeah, no. I think that there is this picture. I'm sure I've seen this picture of him literally leaving, with his arms outstretched like that.
Really?
And yeah, I've definitely seen that somewhere. I'll have another look for you after the show.
There's a certain protocol when in motorsports book. There's a much missed journalist called Simon Aaron who's written various books and was a great friend of Andrew Benson, the BBC correspondent. And I tried to put a book. I was editing a book of his, and I tried to put a book of Bandini's accident just before he hits. Not actually. No, don't wince.
No, but it's just because I know that I'm not. Yeah, but the accident is obviously it is horrendous, and obviously I'm just having that reaction because of what happens.
No, the photograph was just as he's losing control, and I thought that would be okay. But he said, "No, I'm going to take my name off the book if you keep that photograph in." So from that point on, I've always been averse to putting accident photos in,
sure,
because of that reaction. So that's why I hadn't seen that Jean Béra picture. But so many people were thrown out of cars in those days. There's a female racer who was killed at Reims. That's one of the great. Have you been to the?
I haven't, but this. I mean, I was about to talk about Reims because it is so important, and it was, again, it was a collection of roads, but it has these wonderful grandstands that apparently have been. Are they now listed or they?
Well, there's a society for the friends of Reims at Reims Circuit, and they were about, the local commune was about to demolish them, and there used to be something like 30 different pit garages along the main road. It's the D27, I think, down into Gouet, and they demolished about 12 of them, and then the friends of the circuit said, "No, please stop. This is motorsport heritage." And so they've preserved two grandstands one side of the road, the main control building the other side of the road, the garages, the starting control tower. It's just brilliant. If you go back there, you really do feel the echoes of the past.
Yeah.
But Annie Bosquet was killed on that circuit, driving a Spider just like Jean Béra. And there's a corner that's named after her. And it's one of the few ones I actually managed to photograph. And I sort of drove down there. And the circuit is now it goes into a farmer's field, and they've just dumped earth on it. It's like a cul-de-sac ultimately. But there's a little cross at the side of the road just before you get there, and I think that's to her. There's no name on it, but there's just very sort of it's quite moving to see those things still there but neglected.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the way the way that the sport developed, there had to be changes. Obviously, Spa came off the Formula One roster in, I think was it 1971? I think it's Rodriguez's
73.
73. Okay, so that comes off. Obviously, the ring comes up.
No, they came back in. No. It's
because Zolder takes over for a bit, doesn't it? Of course, that's the whole thing with Belgium.
Yeah.
And Nivelle is.
And they had Nivelle as well.
Yeah, exactly. But so these circuits come back, and obviously Nürburgring comes off because of the Lauda's accident, because you can't look after 14 kilometers of track.
No.
And it's been interesting to see these tracks sort of come back. I mean, if you look at any on-screen pictures of the Osterreichring, my goodness, that was quick.
Yeah, but and very noisy, and the neighbours didn't like the noise. Yeah, it's amazing, and you couldn't if you came off at the Nurburgring, certainly in the inner section, you could slide for yards and yards and yards. There's a fantastic accident that Andrea de Cesaris once had, where he goes sliding across the grass for miles and miles. One of many classic Andrea de Cesaris accidents that he had over the years. Yeah, you've still got a sense of that in the new circuit, and they've done that very well. But when they went over there's a ridge. So where at the moment turn one they turn right, they would previously go over the hill through the Hellerlich chicane, and then up the hill the other side of the ridge, and then emerge right at the top of the circuit where there's a very tight turn and where Max Verstappen went into Lando Norris last year. So they did have that huge expanse of space. Alex Wirtz actually tried to see if they could, now that in the hybrid era that the cars are not so noisy, Alex Wirtz tried to see if they could potentially explore putting some of that circuit back. But the neighbours weren't very pleased, and the runoff you needed would take it beyond the boundaries, so it was impossible. But they did look at bringing that back,
because some circuits, they reconfigure them. Spa works. I mean, because you couldn't have the old Spa, so Spa works.
Spa's tremendous.
Yes, exactly, and it's still got enough of the old circuit. Sort of, we've still got Eau Rouge, we've still got Stavelot, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
but then you look at what happened with Hockenheim and the character of the circuit, because Hockenheim was always off into the trees, wasn't it? It was always off into those long straights, and then back into the stadium section, and then off again, which obviously meant, as a spectator, you didn't see an awful lot, and the mist used to hang in the trees, and that was Pironi and Depailler, etc. So it was dangerous. But when they brought Hockenheim back, it was like, because it totally changed the character. I know it sounds different to say a character when you're talking about a piece of tarmac, but circuit, as well as I do, circuits have a spirit to them.
Yeah, I think the thing about Hockenheim was that they were constantly putting chicanes in. They were to slow the cars down because they were just getting way too fast. And it's interesting looking back at some of the chicanes they used to put in. It's compared to the Tech Pro barriers you have today and the high tech. If you look back, there's just a bunch of tires bound together with some wire and put into the circuit. But I mean, Hockenheim's most famous for losing Jim Clark in a Formula 2 race, and at those kind of speeds, he supposedly a tire came loose and just threw him into the trees. But I don't miss Hockenheim at all, because it was just 14 laps of high speed from a TV. I mean, obviously, it gave us the fantastic fight between Elio Salazar and Nelson Piquet, but it was just literally a big thrash of a motor.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but we still have. Talk about putting chicanes in. We still got Monza, and if you talked about Grand Prix, the film in '66. I mean, that uses the banking, even though they weren't using the banking in '66.
No.
And the Cathedral of Speed. Although, okay, you don't go straight down, thank goodness, towards the Lesmers or whatever. But it's still, again, it's kept its. You've still got Parabolica, it's kept its character again, and there is so much history behind that circuit.
Yeah, there's the Royal Parks. Everybody who goes to Monza, I mean, if you're going to plan to see one Grand Prix other than the Monaco Grand Prix, and the Monaco Grand Prix is great because you get so close to the cars and you feel the speed, go to Monza, because the passion on display there of the fans, and who always go to the same place they went and go into the trees they always climbed each year. And certainly all the other Grand Prix, all the Formula One journalists I speak to, they just love that. They have that same feeling about Monza, that it is a religion. You call it the cathedral of motorsport, but it is a religion in Italy, and that's, you know, where they experience their rights.
Yeah, indeed, their passion for variety. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because we're at a stage now where F1, obviously, it's very expensive to build circuits and host Grand Prix. And it is, you might argue that it's being turned into a form of entertainment. And we seem to be, every time we get the thing about a new Grand Prix coming, it always tends to be a street circuit. And I've got nothing against street circuits, but as we see a lot of the times, because I mean, Baku's fantastic, but a lot of street circuits, you hit something and a safety car comes out, and we sit there and the whole thing. And this has been a problem. And yet, you know, the one that everybody will never get rid of, hopefully, is Monaco. And when you look at the front cover, which is what used to be the station hairpin, I mean, I always think of that, you know, Stirling Moss in Rob Walker's Lotus, that, you know, with the half the car missing because he wants to keep himself cool. And even though because the start used to be going down to what was then the Gasworks hairpin, that's changed. Yeah. But otherwise, it is still the ultimate test. And as you said, it's a visceral feeling that you don't get if you're sitting in Shanghai.
No, well, the thing about Monaco is that people have been banging on for years about there is no overtaking spot, and they haven't really done anything to alleviate that. But just the experience of going to a Grand Prix and to being that close to a Formula One car, you get that sense of speed, because on television you don't get that sense of speed. If you stand on the outside of Copse Corner at Silverstone, and you think, hang on, people overtake into that corner, but you stand there live, and you think, how do they do that? And that's a sense that Monaco brings, that the reality of the speed, because all the street furniture, all the buildings are so close, historically so close to the track, that you do get that sense when they're out in the middle of nowhere like Shanghai at the moment. You can't get that sense of speed, but when they're sort of weaving in between buildings, you can.
Yeah.
And yes, I love the station hairpin. The number of photographs taken over the years, and the station's there in one, the station's gone in another, there's a grandstand there in another, then there's a really ugly hotel, then it's a slightly less ugly hotel, and then it's slightly better hotel, but it's just... There's so many comparisons. You could do a book on Monaco.
Yeah.
Literally.
And also, the other thing you get is when it's going, I mean, I miss the V10s. I mean, I used to go to Silverstone on a Thursday, because I'm that sort of anorak, and sit as they would come off the back of Hangar, and then come down through to Abbey, which is now, you know, then go through Farm, and then under Bridge. Yeah. And Bridge was a mighty corner. And the sound, I mean, I remember Hakkinen, you know, coming through in the McLaren, that dates me, and just hearing, and then just seeing the roster of spray because it was wet, and then the car arrived.
That's a surprise.
Yeah, exactly. But also seeing them go through Beckett's and Maggots, like back, and you think, my goodness, you could actually see the car really working, which again you can't see. Yeah.
Yeah, some of the onboards today, where now we've got such great technology and the onboards are quite smooth. Some of you're frightened when you look at the onboards, because they're on the very edge of adhesion to the track. And so with Silverstone, it was really difficult to get a then and a now for a corner, because they've reprofiled and changed so much of it. So you've got Woodcote, Woodcote, you've got various, but basically if you look in the book, there's like an aerial shot of the circuit about 1960 and how it is today, and it's super developed. And if you went back to the 90s, I mean, you will have been to Silverstone with no development around it, and now it's a huge village. It's a technology village. It's It's got hotels. It's got everything.
I used to just love driving into Silverstone, and you go over the bridge, and if you came on a Thursday, there'd be a free practice, and whatever would be going underneath you at full chat. And it was just, again, that, you know, it was that feeling, you know. And I was talk about Woodcote. I was lucky enough to be there in 91 when Senna gets the lift back from Mansell, you know, in the old BRDC clubhouse, and literally I could have stuck my hand out and touched his helmet, because there was just a piece of scaffolding, you know, that was the front of the BRDC clubhouse back in the day.
Well, there is talk about, there's been, Ben Suleiman wants to bring back V10s. He said bring back V10s, and Christian Horner says that's a good idea, and Max Verstappen says it's a good idea to get the noise, but I can't see it happening. I think that is going to be confined to historic Formula One racing rather than the future. We've
kind of talked about sort of the European ones, but one you have put in the book, which, you know, again, if the modern F1 fan probably won't recognize it, but the Glen, Watkins Glen. I mean, traditionally the last race of the season normally, wasn't it? And it was in the beautiful countryside on the East Coast with the most flamboyant, because, ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, there used to be a guy with a flag who'd start the race and also finish it.
Yeah. Ted Hopkins was the most amazing character. Fag-smoking, lilac-suited Ted Hopkins, who would jump up in the air, waving the US flag to start the Grand Prix, and similarly jump up in the air in his lilac suit, fag in mouth, to wave the checkered flag when they came back across the line. And I always wondered when I was researching it, I thought, I wonder what's happened to him. I can't find what's happened to him. But yeah, Watkins Glen got a bit hairy because there were some sort of petrol heads that used to go and camp up there. And they used to hijack cars and set them on fire. And when Emerson Fittipaldi was on the brink of winning the championship in 1974, a bunch of Brazilian fans hired a Greyhound bus from New York, took it up to upstate New York, and parked it. And during the Grand Prix, some of the fans hijacked it, took it to their compound and set it on fire. So its days were numbered. It was just too harem-scarum to a degree.
But as we said, that was the whole thing about racing in this particular era, because it was very much, you know, like, hey kids, let's put the show on here. It was before really Bernie had got and Max had got together and decided the way that this would go, and you had individual promoters basically putting the race on.
The thing about Watkins Glen is the prize money always used to be really good. So, but then Formula One started going to Long Beach as well. So they had Watkins Glen and Long Beach. And so that sort of split it up. Formula One has managed to conjure up an Austin Grand Prix, the Las Vegas race, and Miami. But in those days, two was seen as too much.
Yeah, but also it was quite an issue because you would do the Canadian Grand Prix, which was normally Mosport back in the day, wasn't it? Before, and then you would go down and do what the Glen the following week. What was the most fun then putting this together? I mean, what is your favourite then and now track, and what one would you bring back? Would it be Riem? Would you bring Riem back?
I'd love to see it Riem come back, because but it's a blast. It's like your Hockenheim. It is just to the speeds they could get up to. There's a corner called the Virage de Fillois at the top of the hill, and there's an old restaurant there, and you've got pictures of Froilan Gonzalez going wrestling his
Campus bull
around the corner, and you can see this restaurant beyond, and that restaurant's still there.
Oh
wow! But yeah, Riem would be great, because it would just sort of reaffirm all the values of the past, and also it would attract people to looking up at the history of some of the races.
Yeah, and I also like, because probably my least favourite Grand Prix was in the car park in Las Vegas. So we talked about Las Vegas, but it's Caesar's Palace. They've been great. The Detroit Grand Prix was quite good fun. Long Beach was a great circuit. We've had, as you said before, the Circuit of Americas. It's a fabulous circuit, and then they decided for who knows reason to do this race in the car park at Caesar's Palace. What was it, 1980? I think it was.
Yeah, 80, 81.
Yeah.
They wanted basically the thinking was that Las Vegas could get in all the high rollers. So when you had one of the big fights at Caesar's Palace, that they would bring some really big gamblers into town, and they thought they could do that the same with a Formula One race, so that you would get people coming into town. And basically what has happened 40 years later, they were trying to do then. So that they had the right idea, but they only got Caesar's Palace involved. They didn't involve all the other casinos. They didn't involve Clark County. And so they ended up with a very small space and a track that was repetitive and made the drivers nauseous because it was so repetitive and backwards and forwards. If you look at it, it's one of those boring circuit plans.
Yeah.
But I mean, that is a success story for Formula One.
Well, you're hoping that people are going to, because I'm going around out of time. As you can probably tell, I could talk about this until the flag drops in Shanghai. But what are you hoping that people will? Is this one for the aficionado and also those new to F1?
I think it's people who like the idea of the only relevance you have when choosing some of the old circuits is, can you represent where it is today? Because some of the circuits have just been obliterated from the map, and the joy of a then and now is that you can make a comparison between the corner that was, and you can see an element of the photo that's still there now. So yeah, I think it is more of an aficionado. There are other books that to get you excited about Formula One, but it is just wonderful to be able to write about it. Nigel Roebuck, the great autosport writer, once said that no sport treats its history so badly as Formula One and motorsport. They completely disregard it. And so this is kind of one attempt to help bring it back.
Well, listen, it's a valiant attempt. Well done with this. I'm looking forward to getting my hands on a copy of it. You can order it, listeners, by our own virtual bookstore. The book is called Formula One, The Circuits Then and Now. It's by Frank Hopkinson, who we're speaking to today. Frank, as you can probably tell, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you today.
Thanks, Giles.